Well, Fikile is finding himself in hot water, in fact, boiling water, because I'm suing him for 8 million rands. And that matter is now at the point where we've gone for exploration, demanding from him to give the evidence, to give the hard facts on what he based that statement. And he's failed to meet the deadline to provide that information because there is no information.
Nkululeko on Cultr.
Can I call you whatever I want? There's a publication that called you Mukho of the Year.
Can I call you me that?
Can I call you Mukho of the Year?
I can deny that vehemently.
All right, we've already started. Hello and welcome to everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for liking, subscribing, and commenting on the content. Today we have MK veteran, a member of the African National Congress, which they are somehow always trying to disown you. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Carl Niehaus. How are you doing, sir?
Very well. The ANC can never disown me. I've been a member of the ANC since I was 19 years old. I'm 62 now. So we're talking about 43 years in the ANC.
We'll get there because I'm interested in the how you got to the ANC. But I want us to dedicate the first 30 minutes to an hour to recent developments globally. The economic freedom fighters were scathing in their statement on Queen Elizabeth. They reminded everyone of her imperialistic and colonial past and taking and invading. And of course, others were offended by those statements. What's your position personally about the legacy of the Queen? And what would you like to say to South Africans about her memory, whether or not it should be celebrated? We saw Angie Motshekga, we saw Cyril Ramaphosa, the president, being somewhat positive about her legacy. What's your personal position?
I thought that the statement by the EFF was an excellent statement. In fact, the best statement that had been issued on this passing of Queen Elizabeth II in South Africa. I was deeply disappointed by the statement of President Cyril Ramaphosa and also by the statement of the Inkatha Freedom Party. I think as South Africans, we need to acknowledge the role of colonialism, the consequences of colonialism. The British Queen was the personification, the symbol of colonialism. And we must remember that around about 145 billion British pounds had been extracted out of this country on the basis of illicit removal of gold, of diamonds, of our minerals, the stealing of our land, and in general, the wealth of Britain is built on the wealth of the colonized people who've been subjected by the most vicious colonial powers that we saw in the world. You know, I keep on telling the story about Rhodesia, where Cecil John Rhodes, who was truly the enforcer of colonialism on behalf of the British Empire, forced literally thousands of people off the land, especially those areas where he wanted to mine, and he and a private military company tested the first submachine guns that were ever used on the world, on how effective they would be to kill those indigenous people. That is the history and the legacy of colonialism, and that is the kind of history and legacy that Cyril Ramaphosa and also the Inkatha Freedom Party tried to talk up and tell us that it was a good thing. They are totally wrong. So the EFF was right. It was a good statement. I don't see any reason why we as South Africans should be mourning the passing of Queen Elizabeth.
Why do you think there's a significant number of people who want to revision her history in the positive light, particularly the British? Obviously, it's in their interest to do that. But from Africa, why would there be an interest from us to see it as anything other than repressive, other than our own blood, sweat and tears being extracted, as you mentioned, 45 billion. Why is it that our people would want to celebrate that?
There are some people who've become sellouts. There are African leaders who've sold their souls to imperialist powers, who are in the pockets of those imperialist powers. And the best way I can understand this is people who take care of themselves, their own wealth, the lining of their own pockets, instead of caring about the people and the future of their countries. You know, when we lose history and we lose ideology, we are lost. We lost our compass that direct us to the future. I said this morning to someone who discussed this with me, you know, you can't deny history because history has delivered us to the present and will also produce the future.
Yeah, it's interesting. But anyways, I wanted your statement and your take on it. And thank you very much for giving us that statement. It's interesting that we find a lot of African leaders, although, of course, there is a significant number of people who are cynical about it. And I was so happy to see it. You know, there shouldn't be one point of view that's out there about the Queen. There must be the alternative that she was what she was to us. Even though she was a darling in Britain, she was what she was to us. The other recent development was the advocate Busiwa Mkhwebane, who is the public protector. She was somewhat exonerated by the High Court. She's investigating Cyril Ramaphosa on whatever was happening in his farm, and then within days she's suspended from performing her duties, and then it goes on to court, and so on and so forth. And then we arrive at a point where she's exonerated, although there was a condition that it needs to be verified. The decision to exonerate her needs to be verified by a higher court. What do you make of what was happening there?
I think we must understand the timeline of what happened, because that is critical. Cyril Ramaphosa was sent a set of questions, 31 questions, by the public protector. Within 2 days after he received those questions, he then decides to suspend Advocate Mkhwebane. There was a direct relationship, and it was Cyril Ramaphosa abusing his power as president and the power that he has in terms of the appointment of the public protector in order to protect himself. Now, that is a fundamental conflict of interest.
Yeah.
That's the first point I want to make. The second one is about the ruling of the Western Cape High Court. The Western Cape High Court, I believe, was quite correct to rule that the decision to suspend Advocate Mkhwebane was wrong. They were scathing in their judgment. Now, my concern is, why is it necessary to keep her suspended until the Constitutional Court is going to review this particular judgment? For me, the correct judicial process would be for Advocate Mkhwebane to return to her position, not to allow an injustice to be perpetuated, not to allow the continuation of the abuse of power by President Ramaphosa to continue. And then, let's say, hypothetically, that the Constitutional Court decides to overturn that ruling, then obviously she will have to again find herself suspended. But to continue what is now clearly, in terms of the pronouncement of the Western Cape High Court, an unfair suspension, to continue it waiting for the ruling of the Constitutional Court, I would consider to be unjust, wrong, and I was surprised with the enthusiasm with which the acting public protector seemed to want to enforce that particular position. You know, it's sad when we have one woman who acts against another woman in this way. I would have thought that we would have seen some solidarity amongst women. Advocate Mkhwebane has stood up. She stuck her neck out for what she believes is right. And it is an unfortunate situation that sometimes it seems that the worst enemies of women empowerment are fellow women.
How does this play out in the context of elective conferences within the African National Congress? Because if there's a case to answer with Palapala, this would seem as though it's an attempt to suppress the current public protector insofar as whatever findings she would have against President Cyril Ramaphosa would speak to the step-aside rule. Is this all related?
It is all related.
How?
Well, it clearly is now kicking the ball down the road, the can down the road. And it is giving space for Cyril Ramaphosa to continue his campaign, his CR22 campaign, and also his campaign for president of the ANC now in December. while he has a very serious criminal matter to answer on. That matter cannot be delayed. I believe that the National Executive of the African National Congress should have acted long ago. They should have insisted that Cyril Ramaphosa should have stepped down as president of the ANC and also as president of the country. Just today, there are reports of very, very serious, detailed information that Mr. Arthur Fraser has now presented in addition to his initial charges that he laid against President Ramaphosa. Now, that additional information includes videos, tape recordings, transcripts of conversations, which indicate the direct involvement in President Ramaphosa giving instructions for members of his presidential protection team, thus the South African Police Service, to abduct people, to take them to the Palapala farm, to interrogate and torture them. These are all crimes. And there are clear indications of President Ramaphosa directly having been involved in these. Now, how on earth can we continue with a process of nominating him for president, as in candidate again for the presidency of the ANC, when this sword of Damocles, so to speak, is hanging over his head? This is the way to destroy the African National Congress, and the essential role that the ANC plays in our country means that the destruction of the ANC also has dire consequences for the future of our country.
Yeah. It's interesting because a lot of people are not fans from both sides, or if you want to divide ANC into factions, on both sides, if you ask the question, a lot of people are not fans of the step-aside rule. It seems as though there is a lot of somersaulting and additional effort from the side of the current president to ensure that that is not applicable to him, but it's applicable to everyone else as well. Are you a fan of that rule? How was it introduced to the ANC, and why wasn't there a strong fight against it if it's going to be weaponized against opponents?
There is a strong fight against it, but President Ramaphosa and those around him have forced this rewritten step-aside rule. And I emphasize rewritten step-aside rule,
So
because the
original
resolution
version
that was originally passed in December 2017 at the 54th National Conference of the ANC was not the rule that we have now. It said anyone who has serious allegations, in fact, there are 10 different categories that are mentioned in that resolution, should take it upon themselves to search themselves, their conscience, about stepping aside. Go and read it. Now, that's very different from then rewriting that resolution and say anyone who is charged must step aside. Now, my first problem with this stuff is that the National Executive of the African National Congress has absolutely no right to rewrite resolutions of conferences. Because conferences are the highest decision-making bodies in terms of our ANC constitution. So that is unconstitutional, the rewriting of a resolution. But then, on top of that, you go and reformulate that resolution to turn it into a weapon, to weaponize it, so that you can use it against your enemies. And the way in which you weaponize it also means that you now write something which is unconstitutional in terms of the constitution of the country. There's a maxim in our national constitution that says every person, every citizen is deemed innocent until proved guilty in a court of law. A charge, if you look at it objectively, is an allegation. It is not yet a verdict. But now you already give consequences to that charge. You remove that person from a political position that that person holds. You therefore punish that person. The consequence of removing that person from that political position, such as what happened with the Secretary General of the ANC, Comrade Ace Magashule, when he was forcefully suspended, can mean an end to the political career of that person. Now, that is a very serious consequence. That is a very negative implication on the basis of an allegation. So I'm fundamentally against this stepping aside rule. It is tearing the African National Congress apart. It is unfair, and it is being abused by President Ramaphosa in order to protect himself. You can see what he does now. He uses the fact that it's just this very narrow definition. Once charged, then someone must step aside. And every time he's now being asked about the serious allegations of Palapala that had been brought against him, he says, well, if I'm charged, I will step aside. But we all know that it is Cyril Ramaphosa as president of this country who appoints the head of the National Prosecuting Authority, who appoints the Commissioner of Police, who is in control of all of those law enforcement agencies. So how do we expect that he's going to be charged? He is in control. He is the one who calls the shots. Now he's hiding behind this illicitly rewritten resolution that the NEC produced specifically to protect him and to fight his enemies.
It seems like a predicament to his political opponents, that everywhere you look, as you break it down, that there is no one who's going to charge him except for perhaps Advocate Mqabane if her findings are legally binding. This is very interesting. Outside of Advocate Mqabane, where do you think this could go then, particularly when we narrow it down to Palapala and consequencing the president? Who else could consequence him?
Well, you put your finger on the sore spot. It is exactly because of the implication of the questions that Advocate Mqabane asked and what can flow from that she had to be suspended. But beyond that, I believe we as a society, as a South African community, now have a responsibility to stand up. And that's why I've called several times for people to go onto the streets, to march, to protest, to call for Cyril Ramaphosa to be charged and to be removed from the presidency. I've also said that the National Prosecuting Authority should be put under pressure. The NPA must be asked, why are you not yet in a position to charge Cyril Ramaphosa? And that's why I'm in favor of what is called a mandamus order, which is an order which we can file through the High Court, forcing the NPA to say, they're going to charge Ramaphosa or no, they're not going to charge him. If they give a certificate of non-prosecution, then the road is open for private citizens to bring a private citizen prosecution against Ramaphosa. And that is definitely my and other concerned South Africans' intention to do exactly that if the NPA doesn't do their job. On top of that, there are also the members of parliament. MPs have said that they are going to demand that Ramaphosa must be held accountable. Now, unfortunately, he snooted his nose at the National Assembly. He came there. In fact, he didn't even come there. He stayed away. He just did a link-up, appeared there and said, I'm not going to answer any questions. It was a pathetic performance by my own party's members of parliament, the ANC members of parliament, who were shouting and screaming and performing to defend the indefensible. It was a pathetic performance by the Speaker of the National Assembly who allowed Ramaphosa to be protected. But I must say I'm proud of some of the opposition parties who insisted that Ramaphosa must be held accountable. And that's why last Friday, when the opposition parties organized a march and a picket to the office of the Public Protector, I went there in my ANC golf shirt, clearly as an ANC member, and I said other ANC members should have been part of that march. It is a shame that we, as the African National Congress, as the preeminent liberation movement, are failing to insist on Ramaphosa and the serious crimes that he's being accused of being held accountable.
Yeah. If you make a direct comparison between President Cyril Ramaphosa and President Jacob Zuma, you will see that there was an appetite from civil society to always rise up and even take to the streets occasionally when it comes to President Jacob Zuma. That appetite seems to be lesser in relationship to Cyril Ramaphosa. Why do you think that is the case? Is there anything empirically that Ramaphosa is doing that Zuma was not doing? Because, I mean, we still have load shedding, petrol prices still escalating. I think it's vastly escalating now. Why do you think the citizens don't have the appetite?
I think you are very generous when you say there's a reluctance from civil society. There's a total absence of those civil society organizations that were out in the streets screaming, shouting that President Jacob Zuma had to go. And the reason for that is that those civil society organizations have been funded by big white monopoly capitalism. I can take you to the funding that happened for the Save South Africa campaign. It came from white monopoly capitalist companies inside the country and also from the Open Society Foundation in the United States of America. Now, that funding was directed at trying to get rid of President Jacob Zuma, not because he had supposedly committed some crimes, but because of the position that he had taken in terms of the need for economic empowerment for the majority of black and especially African people. That is the reason why he's been targeted. That is the reason why he was haunted through the 9 years of his presidency and eventually forced out of the presidency. These civil society organizations should be ashamed of themselves. They are selective in their so-called morality. On the one hand, they shout and scream about allegations against President Jacob Zuma. I can tell you a lot of those allegations are just fabrications and lies. But when there are clear, delineated charges, which Cyril Ramaphosa has not even been able to deny, he had to acknowledge, yes, I had all this money on my farm, Palapala. He had to acknowledge that the South African Reserve Bank had not been informed, that the South African Revenue Service had not been informed. He's not denying it. And yet civil society is quiet. Civil society is, in Afrikaans, we've got a word, "Choep stil."
And he's on record mentioning that all of those things happen.
He said, in addition to that, he goes to the provincial conference of Limpopo and says, well, you know, I am a farmer, I've been selling livestock, therefore I made this money. Then the auctioneers who do auctions at Palapala says, no, it's not correct. We do online transactions, there's never cash involved. Then, voila, him and his brother-in-law, Patrice Motsepe, think up a new story. And this time it is some buyer from Dubai who came to buy buffaloes and paid the money in cash. But there's no explanation on how such a huge amount of money illicitly entered the country. And then on top of that is given to the president of the country. And there's also no evidence that those very, very expensive buffaloes have ever been delivered to this supposed buyer. Another, well, I could use the BS word, but let me just say another load of poppycock.
I always say to all of my guests who are African National Congress leaning that there is nothing about Cyril Ramaphosa in 2022 that you did not know in 2012 when you co-opted him into the deputy presidency of Jacob Zuma. There's nothing that you didn't know in advance when you, I think, was it Mangaung when he was elected as a deputy president on the ticket of Jacob Zuma. So one way or the other, you have to take responsibility for him.
Look, it is something which is a sore point for me. And President Zuma and those who are responsible for having decided to bring Ramaphosa back, so to speak, to resurrect his political career, know my views. In 2012, when he was nominated to come in as deputy president, and I understand they had a bit of a problem because Kgalema Motlanthe was not playing the game and suddenly he was now standing against President Zuma, and therefore there was now a gap, a vacancy that had to be filled. But I was fundamentally opposed to the nomination of Cyril Ramaphosa. And the day that Ramaphosa was elected as deputy president of the ANC at the Mangaung conference, I went onto the stage and I said to President Zuma, I am out of here. I didn't stay for his closing speech. I left. And I said to him, and I didn't say it in a disrespectful way, but I was very concerned. I said to him, this is the worst decision you've ever taken, and you will live to regret it. And I left.
You said it on stage?
I didn't say it on
No,
mic.
not on the mic, but you.
But
you
I went
whispered
to
it
the
your-
table, I spoke to him, I said, Baba, I'm leaving now. I'm not staying. I'm not going to stay until the closing of this conference. Because this decision I cannot agree with. I've worked with Cyril Ramaphosa. Remember, I was the national spokesperson of the ANC when Ramaphosa came in as the Secretary General of the ANC. And that's another story. How on earth Ramaphosa from nowhere got parachuted into that position in 1991 at the first legal conference of the ANC in Durban. I am still flabbergasted about. The man was a Johnny-come-lately. But he was elevated by President Nelson Mandela, brought in, also on the back of advice that was given to President Mandela, again by the captains of white monopoly capital industry. The Clive Mennels and Irene Mennels and Oppenheimers of this world, who told him, no, this man is a good guy. Why President Mandela listened to them rather than allowing the proper democratic organizational processes in the ANC to unfold up to this day, I'm flabbergasted about. But okay, he came in. So I worked with the guy. He is self-centered. He was serving the interests of his masters of white monopoly capital right from the beginning. I observed him at close quarters. When the decision was finally taken by the National Executive Committee of the ANC that he was not to be the deputy president, but that Thabo Mbeki was made deputy president, I was in his office when he made that very, very rash and angry decision that he was going to resign and is now going into business. President Mandela, trying to accommodate him, was offering him several jobs in cabinet, top jobs. He said, Cyril, you can be the Minister of Finance, or if you want to, you can be the Minister of Foreign Affairs. He turned them down. I was in his office when he kicked his chair behind his desk against the wall and said, the old man can go to hell. I'm quoting him. The same Cyril Ramaphosa, who today is singing the praises of President Nelson Mandela, and tries to say that he is now the logical person who is expanding the legacy of President Mandela. I saw the selfishness of that man. He is only interested in himself. He is not caring for this nation. He doesn't care for the people of this nation. While he was the head of the negotiating team of the ANC, and I was a junior member of that negotiating team, I watched him engaging with all these big captains of industry, making deals. When Ramaphosa started as the chief negotiator of the ANC at CODESA, he drove a Volkswagen Golf. When he finished the negotiations, he was in the back seat of the top series BMW 7 Series. I am asking myself, how do you instantaneously become a millionaire and a billionaire? Is he such a fantastic businessman? Better than most to be able to become a multi-billionaire? Or was the birthright of our nation, our people, sold there at CODESA? The compromises that were made at CODESA, the sunset clauses, the consequences of Section 25 of our national constitution that prevents the expropriation of land without compensation. The entrenchment of property rights. Remember, property rights of property that was stolen by white colonists are now entrenched in that constitution, and it cannot be changed. All of those terrible compromises were made. And who was at the center of it? Cyril Ramaphosa. And what was the return for having made those compromises? Becoming one of the richest people in Africa.
Yeah. Was he not a delegate in those conversations of the African National Congress? Was he not carrying the message of the NEC, for example, to those negotiations?
Let me remind you of how Cyril Ramaphosa became the chief negotiator of the ANC. He was the Secretary General of the ANC, but not the chief negotiator. In fact, the chief negotiator initially for the CODESA negotiations was Thabo Mbeki. And the head of intelligence was President Jacob Zuma. They went on a trip internationally with President Nelson Mandela. Out of the blue, Ramaphosa called a National Executive Committee meeting. He gets his friends and acolytes and whoever else there to re-maneuver the decisions on who is in charge of the negotiations. Thabo Mbeki is removed, Cyril Ramaphosa is brought in. Jacob Zuma is removed as head of intelligence, Terra Lekota is brought in as head of intelligence. Those things happen when President Nelson Mandela, Thabo Mbeki and Jacob Zuma are out of the country, not able to state their case in the National Executive. That was effectively a coup being pulled off by Cyril Ramaphosa. Yeah. So you ask me, was he there as a collective? No. He went there as the leader of the negotiating team that gave direction to those negotiations, were constantly involved in behind-the-scenes secret engagements with Rolf Meyer, with other members of the National Party. I know that there was a core little group of negotiators, all his chums, who would go from one game park in game reserves, going to discuss the exact clauses that must be in the Constitution, the exact negotiations. And then they would come to the open sessions of CODESA and present those. But the deals had been struck behind the scenes, behind closed doors already. And those deals always inevitably involved the interests of the big capitalist companies in this country. The people such as the Oppenheimers, the Menels, also the international imperialist structures of especially the British Empire, Lord Renwick, who was then the ambassador of United Kingdom here in South Africa, all of them were behind the scenes intrinsically involved in the formulation of those clauses that today delivered us to a continuation of the status quo of white monopoly capitalism continuing to control this country.
Yeah, with that being said, and as a background of how we arrive here, this then brings me back to my question about 2012. That was there anything that you did not know about this individual as you now co-opting him into your deputy presidency? Was that a failure of tactics by then Jacob Zuma? What were your conversations, besides the one you mentioned to him, what were your continuous conversations and his reservations about the decision that he allowed at that point?
Well, obviously I was not part of all the discussions that led to that decision. Obviously that was happening in an inner circle. So I cannot comment on discussions that I was not present with.
Yeah.
What I can tell you is what my personal view was, and I don't want to sound arrogant, but I can say at this stage, when I want to say, I told you so, I think I'm correct.
Yeah.
What I predicted was going to happen turned out and happened. And let's summarize it this way. I have the greatest of love, I've got the greatest of respect and admiration for President Zuma. That is known, it is on the record, my personal relationship with him is known, the things that I have experienced from him, how he supported me when I was still a prisoner, a political prisoner, how he fought for my release, all of those things are on record. But I'm of the firm conviction that it was a strategical mistake to have brought Ramaphosa back and to have made him the deputy president of the country. It did not bode well then, and the fears that I have at that time has played out. In fact, they turned out to be even worse than what I expected.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to observe the African National Congress with all the battles that are happening at the moment, post-2019 elections. and even observing them through the IEC election results nationally over the past 20, 30 years, we arrive at a point where we are discussing the possibility of a DA-led coalition being the winner of the 2022 election. Please help us meditate on that. The African National Congress has been significantly losing percentages through national elections from 67% to now under 60%, like somewhere between 55 and 50%. There is a realistic possibility that there will be a government of national coalition. And that's why, which is maybe an extreme statement, but that's why some of us have been agitating as we engage with people like yourself to say it's possible that John Steenhuisen will be the president of South Africa in 2024. That's not an ignorant statement. It's predicated on the idea that if the Democratic Alliance is the biggest party of a coalition government, you would then assume that whoever is their leader would be elected as president, unless within that coalition they make a compromise and they select someone else.
Let me start off with this last comment of yours about Steenhuisen. God forbid that a twit like that should ever become the president of South Africa. Did you see the kind of comment he was prepared to make about his own former wife? The man doesn't know how to conduct himself, and it is unthinkable that we can have the Democratic Alliance in charge of this country. But unfortunately, that is the consequence of the disaster that we have experienced in the African National Congress with sell-out leaders who've sold our liberationary task. And I want to start with what you said about 67% majority, because that is where the problem for me begins. The failure to use the power that you have. And I lay that blame squarely at the door of President Thabo Mbeki. President Mbeki had the largest majority since 1994. He squandered it. He did nothing with that two-thirds majority. He didn't change the power dynamics in terms of our economy. He didn't address the land issue. He could have changed Section 25 of our Constitution. He could have dealt with the issue of the return of the land to the people. He failed. Instead, he gave us new liberal economic theories, such as gear and trickle-down stories, that we will have wealth trickling down to the majority of people as long as we continue to grow the wealth of the rich. A load of crap. But that is what happened.
Yeah.
Since then, we consistently failed to implement fundamental economic transformation in this country. And the reality is that our people are deeply disappointed in the lack of service delivery from the side of the African National Congress. And that lack of service delivery, that cynicism, because I must emphasize, it is cynicism that's beginning to creep into our body politic. Our people are saying the ANC talks left but walks right.
Yeah.
It doesn't walk the talk. You know, I participated quite extensively in the local government election campaign of the ANC, especially in KwaZulu-Natal. And it was for me an eye-opener, what I saw there. You go to the homes of people, especially in some of the areas around Durban and surroundings, KwaMashu, all of those areas. When you enter the house, the older people in the house, especially the older woman, the gogo, is immediately saying, I'm ANC. You know, she's proud, I'm ANC. Yeah. You see that the youngsters, the children there, keep quiet. They don't say anything. During your conversation, as long as Umama is there, they respectfully don't speak. Then you leave the house, they follow you outside. They say, hey, this ANC of yours, we're not voting for them. So the disaster that the ANC is faced with is that it is losing a growing part of the voters, especially amongst young people. And as long as the ANC is not going to address economic transformation and empowerment, that loss will continue. And that is exactly the reason why you say to me there's a chance that the ANC can lose the elections of 2024.
Yeah.
For me, as a member of the ANC who've dedicated my life to the ANC, that is a very serious thing. It is something which I do not want to see happening. In fact, I think the consequences of that happening is too ghastly to contemplate. Because what we're going to face is a weak coalition. Some cobbled up coalition of small opposition parties with the DA, as you say, probably the largest party.
Yeah.
That weak coalition is not going to be able to implement any fundamental economic transformation policy. It will just allow the status quo to continue. And there will be persistent and consistent squabbling. So we will have a government that is consistently in disarray. Now, I believe, I want to make this point.
That is the same thing that's happening with the ANC.
Yeah, inside the ANC, there's the squabbling, you're right. But I believe that it is the intention of Cyril Ramaphosa and some of those around him to decampaign the ANC, to undermine the ANC, to let us reach the point of this weak coalition government. I think Ramaphosa still thinks that he will be able to emerge as president because he will probably, I'm sure some of the big monopoly capitalists will prevail on the DA to say, well, Steenhuisen is a bit under par. Let's bring Ramaphosa in still as the president. Perhaps he come in as an independent or whatever, or some coalition is formed. But the reality will be whether Ramaphosa is there or not, whether the ANC is part of that coalition or not, it will be weak coalition government. And the excuse will be there to say we cannot implement these fundamental, radical economic transformation policies that are truly necessary if we want to see a change in the lives of our people.
Yeah.
Because now we've got this agreement of coalition that doesn't allow it. And that is what Ramaphosa wants. That is what white monopoly capitalism wants. Because when that happens, their power and the continuation of the status quo will not be challenged.
I would say, before I move on, that in the interest of fairness, that is precisely what the ANC has been doing. And you mentioned that Thabo Mbeki had the biggest majority, 2/3 majority, that would enable him to expropriate land without compensation.
Yeah.
And amongst a lot of other things that he could have done, that someone or people in this country would say that you pushing back on a coalition government on a point that is the ANC is doing the same thing. You are saying that they are going to drag their feet. They're not going to significantly change anything in this country, which I agree with you. That's probably going to happen. But that's exactly what's happening with the ANC at the moment.
Well, the divided ANC that is paralyzed now, yes. What I would like to see, and I'm working with many other comrades on that, is that we need to transform this ANC. That we need to get the members of the African National Congress, especially those at the branches, at grassroots level, to speak up, to have a process of bringing those members through the delegates at the 55th National Conference, to change the leadership, to get rid of these sellouts, to bring in a leadership that will implement a program of radical economic transformation. If we can succeed in doing that, in this coming December 55th National Conference. And we can have a clear, strong program of economic transformation. And we immediately start working for its implementation. And we set ourselves clear, achievable goals within the next 2 years from hence on. I think it is still possible for the ANC to recover to such an extent that it can continue to garner an overall majority in the 2024 elections. But if we fail to do that, if we continue to limp along as we do now, if we continue with these divisions, if we continue to have a leadership under Cyril Ramaphosa in control after the 55th National Conference, it is ikabot. It is over. The ANC will destroy itself. The ANC will not manage to garner an overall majority in the 2024 elections. That is as serious as the situation is. And that is why I'm prepared to throw my all into it. I'm no longer mincing my words. Now is the time. Sekunjalo. This is the watershed moment. If we fail now, it is over. So it is now or never.
I just want to say as well that empirically we know that for every national election, the apathy amongst the voters grows. We're looking at 4 million people who were eligible to vote who did not vote maybe 8 years ago. Now the number changes to 6. And I can say with certainty that there could be anywhere between 8 to 10 million people who in 2024 will decide not to vote. I don't know how you convince those people to go to the ballot. And that's you, the ANC, or the EFF, or the DA, or any other political party that the job also is to convince those people to, one, heed the call for your message, because it's not doing them any favors. They are still going to be subjected to load shedding, whether they vote or not. There will still be a party that implement policies that they don't like, that affects them negatively. So they might as well come and vote. I think that is another thing as well. What I want to ask you about national...
Can I just say something there? Because I think the points that you are making are very salient points. The only way that we will be able to get this larger growing number of people who don't vote to come back to vote is to stop having the huge credibility gap between what we say and what we do. So and that is why I said to you earlier, we should have a policy program with clear, achievable goals after the election now in December, the 55th conference. Those goals must include an end to load shedding, the beginning of the transformation of this economy, which must include the creation of a Black African Bank, the nationalization of the South African Reserve Bank, forming the necessary coalitions within Parliament, within the National Assembly, in order to get legislation through that will address Section 25 of our Constitution and start the process of the restitution of land to the people. If we do that, and if we can show that this ANC that emerged from the 55th National Conference is not the one that talks left and walks right, but implements policies that begin to make a difference to the lives of our people, a lot of the vote will return to the ANC. The absence of people voting is not just apathy. It is also a sense from many members of our communities that they love the African National Congress. They still continue to see themselves first and foremost as members and supporters of the ANC.
I agree with you.
But because the ANC has failed them, they stay away from the polling booths because they cannot get themselves so far as to vote for another party. So the only option that they see under those circumstances, feeling so betrayed by the ANC, is not to vote. So we must undo that betrayal through active and clear, achievable programs of implementation.
In your experience with elective conferences, I don't want to sound cynical, that's why I'm framing this question like this, that in your experience with elective conferences, is it even possible to win against money? Because in just observing life, I look at people battling and I will always pick the one with more money to win. Is it even possible? I know that it's in your interest to push the message that you could change the course of events in December. But is it really a realistic thing to think that you could win against money? Has these conferences been so diluted with money that all you need to know is who has the most money and you will know who wins?
You know, it's a very, very important question. And I don't want to treat it flippantly. Because I want to go back to a historical statement that was made by Patrice Lumumba. And he said, I campaigned for months. I had policy programs. I went from house to house, from village to village. My opponent arrived on the weekend before the elections with a truckload of money. Mm-hmm. He won. Now, I don't want to put a full stop behind that statement. I want to put a comma. Because I want to say that it should be possible for us to break that vicious cycle. It cannot be that we as a nation have gone through the fight against apartheid, have sacrificed so much, that we've seen people like Solomon Mahlangu laying down their lives, and then we sell our birthright for true liberation for the proverbial biblical pot of lentil soup. Because the money that we talk about that gets handed out in brown envelopes at conferences are truly the crumbs from the table of the banquets of the rich. And it will be sad if our people allow that little money, those crumbs, to prevent our country from having a true future. I know what you're going to say to me. Yes, but people are poor, people are desperate. 50,000 rand, because that's sometimes the amounts of money that gets paid to delegates.
Individual delegates.
Individual delegates.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, but remember when you, how do you think we got to 1 billion rands for Cyril Ramaphosa's campaign in 2017? There's 5,000 delegates at best at a national conference.
Yeah.
So I want to appeal to the better nature of our people. I want to appeal to the need for our people, even if they take the money, and I don't want to tell them to take it because I'm in fundamental opposition to them taking the money. But even if they take the money, if they somehow can't fail to take that envelope, they must still do the right thing. And the right thing cannot be to vote for Cyril Ramaphosa, because that is to vote against your own most fundamental self-interests. So yes, I understand that one may want to have this argument, money will settle the score, and there's no debate beyond that. I am not prepared to settle for that. I want us to continue to commit to the principles for full liberation of the African National Congress. I want our people and our branches to deliver delegates to the 55th National Conference that will not sell their birthright for the little crumbs from the tables of the wealthy, and will think further than that, just the next meal or the next rent. Think about how their actions and their decisions at that 55th National Conference will impact on the future of their lives in the long term, but especially on the lives of their children. And that is the message that I'm conveying. Whether it will work or not is not going to determine whether I'm going to deliver that message. I will deliver that message. And there are many other members of the ANC who will deliver that message during the next couple of months. And we will continue to fight to prevent this insidious, corrosive use of money to destroy the future of our country.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was speaking to a few friends who were doing a podcast, and they asked me questions, and I say, given the fact that Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma got 48% of the vote in the National Elective Conference of the ANC in 2017, is it not plausible to say that even her side, there were monies exchanged? Is that not a plausible? Because it was so close that it was either 51-49 or 52-48. And that was so close that I thought, you know what, there must have been some maneuvering even on the other side too, which is probably speaking to the nature of elective conferences. Be that as it may, I think her candidacy has been officially mentioned now that she will go again against President Cyril Ramaphosa. What do you think of that? Because I've been asking people in politics who is the natural competitor against Ramaphosa going to December. There hasn't been anyone. We thought maybe Ace could say something, but it wasn't really strong. And then Zweli Mkhize as well, Dr. Zweli Mkhize said something, but it wasn't really that strong. Who is the natural opposition to President Cyril Ramaphosa going to the national election?
I'm not going to pronounce on that now, because we as the African National Congress have to go through proper processes. Okay. And we've only started this nomination process. The reality is that the national executive of the ANC has not even yet announced that the time has come for nominations. So instead of talking names, talking about individuals, we should talk principles. Mm-hmm. What should be delivered to us as a candidate that will effectively be able to oppose Ramaphosa and the sellouts with him, whether he's still going to be at the 55th National Conference or whether he's going to be nickered out by Palapala, be that as it may. Mm. But we must have a candidate that has integrity, that is committed to radical economic transformation, that has the support of the majority of the ANC delegates that go to that conference, representative of the mandates that they've been given by the branches of the ANC. And that candidate and those together with that candidate that gets elected onto the national executive must make a commitment to implement, and I repeat again, this achievable program of delivery that will be able to make a fundamental change in the lives of our people before the next national election of 2024. That is what must happen. Who that candidate can or should be is not for me to say here. But may I say that it will not be a bad idea to have a woman president. The ANC has had great women leaders over decades. I can just remind you of the great Lillian Ngoyi, of Mama Albertina Sisulu, of course, of Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela, and many others. All of them, if you look at them and the contribution that they made to our liberation struggle, could have been presidents of the ANC. There is something wrong within the ANC that we haven't yet had a woman president. I think part of our problem is that the persistent patriarchy and misogyny in our society also finds itself inside the ANC. And it would be good if we can address those issues. And we can also reflect the very basic fact that the majority of members of the ANC, and also therefore the majority probably of delegates who will be at the 55th National Conference, are women. In fact, the majority of South Africans are women.
Yeah.
And it is wrong that a woman has not yet been the president, but we should also address something else, and that is that there has to be representativity in all the structures of the ANC and in government representing women. I don't understand how we allow the situation that in the top 6 of the ANC there was only one woman, the Deputy Secretary General, Comrade Jessie Duarte. Mm-hmm. We say that we want to have quotas for women in the national executive, that there must be a proper representation. But we don't extend that representation to the top 6. Yes, I know the constitution of the ANC says that the top 6 of the national office bearers are not an official structure. Mm-hmm. But those are the decision makers. Those are the people who are the implementers. It is the national office bearers who meet regularly on a weekly basis. It can't be that there's only one woman in that structure. At least there should be a 50% representation also in that top 6 of women. And those are issues that we need to take forward into this forthcoming national conference and address them.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's move. Let me dwell a little bit on 2024. Then I want to move to the personal, your journey, and everything else, as we mentioned from the beginning. would it repulse you if there was a coalition between the African National Congress and the Democratic Alliance? And
Yes.
why?
Yes.
Why?
The Democratic Alliance is the personification, the incarnation of the old white regime. I'm sorry, but I do not see the DA in terms of those that are in control of the DA, those that lead the DA, and the majority of those who vote for the DA, any different from the old establishment and status quo that has morphed into the DA coming from the old apartheid regime and the National Party. It will, in essence, in my core, offend me. I cannot foresee something like that. I do not want to see it. The DA does not deserve to be in a coalition with the ANC, and to put it differently, the African National Congress doesn't deserve a coalition with a party that is still mainly representative of white and white monopoly capitalist interests, and is still in its core a racist party. Go and ask Musi Maimane what he experienced. Go and ask other black leaders who tried to find their way in the DA how they got treated. Go and ask him about the conduct of Madam Helen Zille. I cannot have the DA as a coalition party of the ANC. It will offend me deeply.
If the EFF maintains consistency, we could possibly be looking at anywhere between 10 and 14%. If the ANC lands on somewhere at 42%, the combination of the EFF and the ANC's percentage could be somewhere at 54%, which is enough to run a country. However, if the condition is to make Julius Malema the president, would you agree with something like that?
Well, you see, that's a very speculative,
Of course, obviously, we are
very,
speculating.
very speculative thing. And I think it is not fair to give me that question. A fair question from your side would have been, will you find it palatable for a coalition between the ANC and the Economic Freedom Fighters?
All coalitions have conditions.
But it doesn't necessarily follow that the condition would be or should be who is going to be the president at this stage. But the principle of what you are asking me, I can live with.
Sure.
I do not see a fundamental problem in terms of the African National Congress and the EFF being able to work together. In fact, I'm strongly in favor of greater unity amongst all African parties, all progressive African parties. African unity is something which is essentially necessary. The party political system that we have has created divisions amongst Africans, many of whom have roughly the same objectives. And the unity amongst Africans today is even more important than ever before if we want to bring an end to this white monopoly capitalist continuation of having this country in its stranglehold. So African unity, yes, between the EFF and the African National Congress, I wouldn't in principle be opposed to it at all, but also African unity inclusive of other groupings, whether it's political parties or civil society organizations that represent a progressive program of African empowerment, I would support.
All right. It would be an interesting coalition because I think it would be predicated on certain things that ANC needs to give to the EFF. I think we've seen, even with the discussions of coalitions within municipalities or metros, that there is, even if you only have like 6%, there is the push towards you conceding certain positions and whatever. But we'll see.
But you see, those are mechanics. And a couple of years before you reach that point, I think it is much better to talk about the principles and look at how you can deal with the mechanics once you understand the principles. And the only point I'm trying to make to you is that in principle, I can find a lot of reasons why such a coalition could be a good thing for our country in terms of African unity.
Yeah, I think the EFF would have a lot to explain. I get what you're saying about principles, of course. All African-led parties want to get to, or we can assume that they want to get to the same destination, sometimes differently. But the economic freedom fighters would have a lot to explain to their voting constituents about the fact that why is it that because we've turned our backs on the ANC and we've given you the vote and then you now take it back to the ANC. I think that's like the one thing that they would have to explain to their constituency, that look, we are the same party. In essence, we are Africans and we're working towards with the returning of the wealth, blah, 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 and the land. I think that's what I've been hearing from the EFF, even when they were trying to explain away why they coalesced with the DA, that at the time it was so fresh in 2012 that the birth of the EFF is a direct result of them moving away from the ANC. So the last thing you would want at that point is to take those votes, give them back to the ANC, which is you're going to have a hard time explaining to your voters why are we taking away the votes.
But you may not just simply be giving votes back to the ANC.
Oh, no, of course.
You may very well be having a fundamental influence on a policy program.
For sure. That's difficult to explain to the masses.
No, but the issue is finally going to be a policy program.
Yeah.
And how you will explain it to the masses, if we want to use that word, is how that policy program will improve the lives of people in a practical sense. Yeah. That is where it will work or where it will fail. And anyhow, let's not forget, the EFF is the children of the ANC.
Yeah.
So there can be a way in which the EFF and the ANC come together again.
It gets complicated. I get what you're saying. I mean, I think we're speaking the same language.
Yeah.
I'm just speaking on the idea that if the intention of the masses in 2024 is to see a governing party which is not the ANC, how do you then explain it to them that, no, we took our 20%? I get it, like on a point of policy and on a point of the improvement of the lives. No, they've promised us that there won't be load shedding anymore. There will be a significant reduction on the fuel price or any other thing that is that's directly affecting the masses on a day-to-day basis. But still, the optics of it I get it personally. I understand it personally. But I think it gets more complicated when the people's intention is to take away power from the ANC and then they see you giving it power.
But is the intention of the people truly to take power away from the ANC? I don't think the majority of South Africans are out there with a single-minded determination that they want to punish the ANC. I think the response of the majority of South Africans to the ANC is one of disappointment in a party that they still in their hearts of hearts love. So I think the concern is more, how do we get a policy program and true service delivery on the go? And if the African National Congress can be part of that process, I think many people who now have stayed away from voting will happily vote for the ANC again. I don't see a fundamental hate for the ANC. You know, the emotion that I pick up from our people is not one of hatred. It's one of disappointment. And then it flows over from disappointment to disillusionment.
Yeah.
And that is what we need to address. So I don't think the fundamental issue is that they want the ANC to be punished. They want the ANC to get its act together and to again act as a true liberation movement.
We shall see in 2024. And like I said, I'm interested in the personal as well. You were named Mogo of the Year. You are always, every now and then, Mambara of the Week. For whatever reason, there is somewhat of a fascination with your character.
Well, you know, when you get called something by someone, you must always ask yourself, who is the someone who calls you that something? And when I get called Mampara of the Week and goes on for a second week by the Sunday Slimes. I can't possibly get myself too upset about it.
And the Daily Maverick doesn't like
And if the Daily Maverick wants to call me Mampara or Mujo of the Year, I don't know, there's so many different things they call people. I can tell you who the Daily Maverick is. The Daily Maverick is funded by money from the United States of America. The Daily Maverick is edited by an expatriate who is here in South Africa, who is, I don't believe, here with the interests of South Africa at heart. The Daily Maverick serves the interests of imperialist powers. So why should I worry with an imperialist propaganda rag such as the Daily Maverick is, want to call me Mampara or Mugu? In fact, I'll take it as an accolade, as something of honor, because obviously I am not in line with what they stand for. And thank God I'm not in line with what those people stand for. They go around telling us on their headmast that they're there for fighting against corruption and they're for accountability. Go and read the headmast. But then their beloved sunshine boy, Cyril Ramaphosa, is caught with his pants down at Palapala. And what does Ferial Hafaji, the deputy editor of the Daily Maverick, do? She starts attacking everyone who raises the issue about what Ramaphosa had done. She starts questioning the integrity of Fraser. And she goes on and on and on in terms of all the reasons why Ramaphosa had actually not committed a crime. Now let me tell you, if $4 million was found under the mattresses and the couches of President Zuma at Nkandla, can you think what the Daily Maverick would have been up to? Do you think President Zuma would today still have been walking around freely there in Nkandla? You think he would not have been charged for contravention of foreign exchange regulations and everything else from here to Cape Town and from Cape Town to Cairo? All of that would have happened. But the Daily Maverick tells us they're there for accountability. But they're a propaganda rag. And they are Stratcom-like operations in the guise of being journalists. So I've told, none of these things that I'm saying to you now, I've whispered in the corners. I've told them straight. I have written letters to Ferial Hafaji telling her exactly what I think of her. I've written letters to the editor of the Daily Maverick. I am now in the process, my attorney is sending me today the letters that I'm suing the Daily Maverick because they went and wrote that I was one of the kingpins of organizing the July uprisings last year. They go and say all of that nonsense.
That's a serious allegation.
Yes, and I'm going to sue them. And I'll sue them for a couple of million rands. My lawyer has got the instruction. And I've written to Branko Brink, the editor of the Daily Maverick, and said, I am suing you because you've got not a shred of evidence that I've done so. The same nonsense was done by Fikile Mbalula last year. He went on Hard Talk. He said, I was at the core of the uprising and at stirring up the July uprisings. The interviewer in Hard Talk even said to him, Mr. Mbalula, I hope you know what you're talking about. Otherwise, you're going to find yourselves in hot water. Well, Fikile is finding himself in hot water. In fact, boiling water. Because I'm suing him for 8 million rands. And that matter is now at the point where we've gone for exploration, demanding from him to give the evidence, to give the hard facts on what he based that statement. And he's failed to meet the deadline to provide that information because there is no information. So I'm going to sue the pants of that boy. And I'm deliberately using the word boy because he's a young man compared to me. And he should have had some respect when he engages with other members of the African National Congress. I'm tired of the disrespectful manner in which Fikile Mbalula treats not only other members of the ANC, but also the whole nation.
Yeah. What is your current standing within the African National Congress? What's your position? Are you an ordinary member? Are you still suspended? Why were you suspended if you were?
I'm a long-standing member of the ANC. I'm now, this year, 43 years.
Yes.
I joined when I was 19. I joined outside Gaborone on a little hill on a koppie in 1979. I've served the ANC in many different capacities, from the underground, member of MK, member of the African National Congress, worked in the underground, especially in Alexandra. I was charged with high treason when I was eventually arrested for my ANC and MK activities in 1983. I was severely tortured, held in a long period of solitary confinement, and eventually sentenced to 15 years imprisonment. I served 9.5 years of that sentence. When I came out, I immediately started working again for the ANC. I was national spokesperson. I was a junior member, as I've said, of the negotiating team of the ANC. I became a member of parliament. I was specifically national spokesperson also for President Nelson Mandela. I became also a member of the national executive of the ANC. I served as chair of the ANC's subcommittee for religious affairs. I've done many senior jobs for the ANC. Yeah. Today, I'm a member of the ANC. I'm a member of the national executive of Umkhonto we Sizwe Military Veterans Association, also of the National Working Committee of MKVA, and I'm also the national spokesperson. But most importantly, I am a South African who loves this country and who will not allow this country to go down, to be destroyed by those who've sold out. My most important commitment to this country is one where there must be an end to racism, but also economic exploitation. And anyone who is going the route of selling us and destroying the hopes and the reason also why I joined the ANC, I will fight. If you ask me whether I'm suspended now from the ANC, no, I'm not. I am a member in good standing. The ANC, NEC, majority of whom are Cyril Ramaphosa's acolytes, have now 3 times tried to bring disciplinary charges against me. They've failed every time. Last year in July, they warned me that they were going to charge me because I said at Nkandla on the 4th of July that the judiciary is captured and that the judgment of the Constitutional Court sentencing President Jacob Zuma to 15 months of imprisonment was not correct. They said the NEC took a different decision and therefore I've contravened the NEC's decision and therefore I must be charged. My response, together with my legal representative, Matthews Poza, was very simple. In 2015, Gwede Mantashe severely criticized the judiciary. In 2016 and 2017, Blade Nzimande went on record as saying that judiciary is captured. Last year, and also the beginning of this year, Comrade Lindiwe Sisulu severely criticized the judiciary.
Yeah.
Criticized the judiciary in much stronger terms than what I had said at Nkandla in that press conference for which the NEC wanted me charged. When we said all of those things, they dropped the charges. Then in October, they tried to reintroduce the charges, but now the problem that they were faced with is they couldn't find a single NEC member of the ANC who was prepared to come and give evidence against me because they all saw that they were going to be taken right to the cleaners. So Comrade Jessie Duarte, they wanted her to come and give evidence, but she was ill and she passed on, sadly so. Gwede Mantashe withdrew because he couldn't sustain a position of criticizing me when he himself had criticized the judiciary and when he also said that Lindiwe Sisulu had done nothing wrong by criticizing the judiciary. They tried to get Jeff Radebe to come and give evidence as head of policy. He ran away. So they now want to reintroduce the charges against me, but the problem for them is the ANC Constitution, Clause 25 of the ANC Constitution with all its subsections says a charge, once it is introduced, must be expedited in terms of its execution, and if it is not finalized within 6 months, it falls away. They have failed to do it in 6 months. So those charges are null and void. I will continue to say what I'm saying. I've done nothing wrong. I've got the right and freedom to say so. I know that there are members of the National Disciplinary Committee of the ANC who are on a daily basis called by Cyril Ramaphosa and told that they must charge me. They are being pressurized to do it. That's why they do these stupid things of bringing charges that can't stick, because they are being pushed all the time. Well, tough luck for Cyril Ramaphosa. Tough luck for that NDC. They don't have charges against me. They cannot throw me out of the ANC. My blood is black, green, and gold. I've given my life to the ANC. The ANC is my family. No one will chase me out of the African National Congress.
What is the current state of the MK military veterans? Is that officially disbanded?
No, it's not. The National Executive Committee, again under pressure from Cyril Ramaphosa, had tried to disband MKVA. But that act was illegal. MKVA is an autonomous structure with its own constitution. The National Executive of the ANC has no right and no legal leg to stand on to disband MKVA. We tried to be reasonable with the ANC. We tried to continue and walk the second mile to work for unity amongst MK veterans. We were prepared to accept the resolution of the 54th National Conference that said we must work for unity. But instead of working in a clear and unequivocal way for unity, the ANC NEC was acting against MKVA in a factional way. They supported MK National Council. They tried to give MK National Council the same level of credibility as MKVA, which is nonsense. MK National Council was established as an illegal parallel structure. It never had any legal leg to stand on. But we did try to go to a unity conference in April this year, but it was a farcical conference in East London. It was a manipulated conference, and the MKVA delegation walked out. We do not accept the outcome of that conference. We do not accept the so-called military veterans, whatever, blah, 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 they call themselves. They are not constitutionally acceptable. MKVA has not been disbanded. The only way that MKVA could have been disbanded was at a conference where 7 provinces agreed to MKVA being disbanded. That has not happened. So now we have an application that goes to the High Court where we demand that that farcical gathering that took place in April in East London should be declared null and void, and all the decisions that were taken there are null and void. In the meantime, MKVA, as the only legally representative structure for MK veterans, continues to exist. We continue to function. Our national executive is on full duty. We have had provincial general councils in several provinces already. We continue to hold those PGCs, and after that we will have provincial elective conferences, and then we will eventually have a national elective conference. We also have a very extensive program of action that we are implementing throughout the country. That includes addressing the needs of our members of military veterans who have been severely neglected by this ANC for whom they gave their lives. And we are also running a campaign which is called Everyone Should Be Equal Before the Law, which directly addresses this issue around the Palapala Farmgate scandal and Cyril Ramaphosa that needs to be charged. MKVA is now taking the lead in organizing marches to the National Prosecuting Authority, to the South African Reserve Bank, to the South African Revenue Services, and finally also we will have a big march to Palapala, where we're going to demand that we be told by President Ramaphosa what exactly transpired there at that farm of his.
Why would there be an interest from the ANC to disband such an important wing of their political party? In addition to then answering that question, when you then march and organize what you've just described now, go to Palapala, SARS and everything else, are you not acting like a pressure group in opposition to your mother body party?
You ask a very important question. Why would the ANC try to disband such an important structure?
Yeah.
And the reason is the following. MKVA has stood on principle. MKVA has supported also President Jacob Zuma throughout all his problems and throughout all the attacks and persecutions that he had faced. President Cyril Ramaphosa and the faction that is part of him do not like what MKVA is doing. And they use their majority power in the National Executive Committee of the ANC to pass illegal decisions to disband MKVA because MKVA was the fly in the ointment for them. So we are not allowing them to do that because we will not accept illegal actions. And it is illegal for them to do what I've just described to you. Yes, we are a pressure group. We are pressurizing for justice. We are pressurizing for the ANC to return to its original revolutionary position and principles. MK soldiers have always been at the cutting edge of our revolution. MK soldiers are the ones who have always been the most committed members of the African National Congress. Yeah. These are people who are prepared to sacrifice their lives, who left the country under the most difficult and dangerous circumstances. If you think of what the young people of Soweto in 1976 and subsequently went through, leaving this country at great danger to their lives, going into very difficult situations in camps where the conditions were not very positive, who came back trained, and many of them died fighting for our liberation. Those are the people who have got the right to stand up and say, hey, guys, you are doing the wrong thing now. You are not following and not implementing the revolutionary policies why we joined the ANC. We know some of our fellow comrades who laid down their lives and died for this organization. You are making a mockery of their sacrifice. Why can't we, as MKVA, put pressure on our mother body to correct its follies? Every time that I stand up to speak, to oppose what the ANC in the form of Cyril Ramaphosa and his acolytes are doing, I've got one young man in the back of my mind, a soldier with the name of Vincent Shabalala. Vincent I got to know in the underground of Alexandra. That was in the early 1980s, before I was arrested. Vincent was a leader of COSAS, of the student movement in Alex. He was then becoming a target of the apartheid regime, and I helped him to leave the country. I took him across the border of Botswana. He went for training. He joined the MK. He went for training in Russia and in the German Democratic Republic. He was sent back as a trained soldier of Umkhonto we Sizwe. He went back to Alex. He was busy working in the underground as an MK operative there. He was cornered in a house there by the police and by the South African Defence Force. There was a firefight because he was not a coward. He fought. He was shot dead. Now, Vincent joined. I know why he joined. Because he wanted to see true liberation. Because he wanted to see full economic empowerment of our people. Him and I spoke many times, especially during the time that he was in hiding before he left the country. It was for 2 weeks. I put him up in a safe place at St. Peter's Priory in Rosettenville. We spoke every night. He was a hugely committed cadre. Now, why must I betray Vincent? His life, the young life that he sacrificed for this liberation. Because Cyril Ramaphosa wants to drive around in a big car and wants to have R1 billion bank account and live in big houses and sell us out to the white monopoly capitalist powers of this country that be. No ways.
Mm-hmm. How were you able to navigate apartheid South Africa and integrate within African South Africa to be part of this political party? How difficult or easy was it to even gain the trust in the 1970s for you to be a member of this political party, for you to be trusted with information about its clandestine military activities?
Look, it wasn't easy. I always tell the story that when I first engaged with students white students actually, from Niehaus, some of them went around telling the story that they think I'm a policeman and a spy. Now, I want to show you. I hope the camera can catch it. My dad, I'm an Afrikaner boy. Ne? Yeah. You see those shiny shoes?
Yeah.
My dad taught me every morning, before I go to school, I must go outside on the back stoop, put the newspapers there, take the polish, shine my shoes. I still do it every day. But those Niehaus students said, hey, this one is a spy. Have you seen those shoes? They are shined just like a policeman's shoes. Yeah. Now, I'm making a joke, but I'm telling you something very serious. I came from an Afrikaans background. When I was kicked out of the Rand Afrikaans University, because I had put up posters calling for the release of President Nelson Mandela and for the university to be open to all South Africans, because it was a racially segregated university. When I was kicked out, I didn't have anywhere to go. In fact, my dad was furious because now I'm kicked out of the university. I lost my bursaries. My dad threw me out of the house. And I didn't have any other support network. I just had this ideal that I'm opposed to apartheid. That was the principle for me. So I was for 2 weeks hanging around, sleeping on benches in parks, not having a home. And then I saw posters on lamp poles that a certain Father Simeon Nkwane was the dean of the Anglican Church at St. Mary's Cathedral, was fasting and praying for people who were thrown out of informal settlements. I said, look, I think I identify myself with those ideals. Let me go and see that.
Other than the fact that you were not from informal settlements.
Yes, I wasn't, of course. But part of the reason why I was opposed to apartheid was exactly because I saw this huge difference between how I, as a white person, was living and being treated and the majority of black people. So I went to see Simeon Nkwane. He then introduced me to an Afrikaner with the name of Beyers Naudé. Dr. Beyers Naudé was an Afrikaner priest, a dominee, who got kicked out of the Dutch Reformed Church because he decided to oppose apartheid. And Umbay became the person that became my political mentor. He helped to introduce me to some of the leadership of the ANC, also the United Democratic Front at that time. It was Mbeki who helped me to leave South Africa, go across the border into Botswana in 1979 and join the ANC. So he helped to open those doors, and I'm hugely grateful to him. I always think of him as my second dad. When my dad stopped being my father because he was angry with me because he couldn't understand why I'm opposing apartheid, Mbeki took over as my father. So I became involved in the anti-apartheid work of the ANC inside the country, primarily in Alexandra. I worked in an underground cell also from Mkhonto Sizwe in Alexandra. We carried out certain operations. We were busy with the garnering of information for targets, etc. My cell was infiltrated by a student at the University of the Witwatersrand, a chap with the name of Robert Whitecross. That exposed me and those who were with me in that cell, which included also Obed Papela and a number of other comrades. And that is how I was arrested, and how I was eventually then, as I have already described, held in John Foster Square, tortured, and eventually charged, and I ended up in prison. So it was a long journey. And I think it is a journey that I always had to understand that, yes, I'm part of the liberation struggle. Yes, I am fighting against apartheid. But I'm also someone who did benefit from apartheid. I got a better education. I lived in a better suburb. I must always understand that I am a white person who joined the African National Congress and fight for liberation, yes. But I must never be arrogant enough to think that I can fully comprehend the full impact and the consequences of apartheid that it had on my fellow black brothers and sisters.
What I notice as well, every single time that an article is written about you, when you check on who is commenting, you see a lot of white South Africans. And there does seem to be a pattern of ridicule towards you. I don't know whether they are disappointed that someone who looks like them could be a fundamental member of the ANC, like entrench their lives to be part of the ANC. Why do you think that is, though? Like white South Africans ridiculing you, maybe trying to show it in your face that you made the wrong decision, you joined the wrong party, look at you now, they're trying to suspend you, this and that, they're persecuting you. Why do you think that you are being ridiculed by white South Africans? Have you noticed that?
Yes, I've noticed that, but it's also not universal. But of course, some of those whites who do that, they do this thing which is called in German Schadenfreude. They enjoy the fact that I'm now also facing trouble with the African National Congress. But I don't mind that. Not every white in this country is opposed to me. I'm engaging all the time with people in the white community. But the same message that I deliver to the African National Congress, to any one of my fellow comrades, I deliver to also the people of the white community. I tell them that justice in this country must be also economic justice. I tell them that as whites, they have benefited from apartheid, whether they like it or not. Even these young people who've been born since 1994, they still benefit from apartheid because they benefit from the consequences of apartheid as it had empowered and enriched their white families. So I do all of that. And I continue to deliver the same message. I recently was invited by a group of people who have a regular event on every year where they give awards to not white, but Afrikaner writers. And I was asked to speak there. And I delivered exactly the same message that I deliver at an ANC meeting. I don't believe in cutting my cloth to fit particular places. I'm there to deliver a message that justice is needed in South Africa, and the only way in which we will have peace and unity in this country if there's economic justice, and if the young people who roam the streets of our townships can have a future. If that doesn't happen, whether you're white, whether you're black, you will have a very, very unpleasant future in this country. And you will not be able to rest calmly. So justice is essential. And justice in this country must always be translated to economic transformation and economic justice. If young people don't have the right to a good education, if that education cannot ultimately deliver for them on employment, if they cannot have the right to have a life where they can build a house, have a family, have a future, they will turn on us. And I will not blame them for turning on us.
Yeah, it seems a message very similar to the late Professor Sampie Terreblanche.
That's correct.
Who was speaking the same language, of course, in more technically economic terms about the future of the country if the 70% majority who are poor are not taken care of. Because of load shedding and time, we'll probably have 10, 15 more minutes. I'm curious to ask you about God. What he, she, it is to you, what he, she, it means to you.
Before we go there, let me just say that I knew Professor Sampie Terreblanche very well.
Nice one.
He was my friend, and I can even call him my comrade.
I loved listening to him.
He was a most articulate man. And the reason why he was so able to articulate his views is because he understood history. Because remember, Sampie always spoke about the history of where he came from, about the role that he played within the Afrikaner community and even in the National Party in his early days, that he was an economic advisor to prime ministers of the National Party.
Yeah.
He could always talk also about the empowerment of the Afrikaner working class, which was an important lesson, which the African National Congress never seemed to have learned. The role that, for instance, state-owned enterprises played in the empowerment of white Afrikaners, poor whites, the role that the Spoorweë, the Transnet played, even in my own life. My dad was a member of the Afrikaner working class. He worked as a fitter and turner in the railways. I benefited from that empowerment, although it was a racist-defined empowerment. So Sampie always spoke with that history. And it is a great pity that so many of us, including people like Tito Mboweni and some of these pseudo-economists that emerged in the ANC, were not listening to the message that Sampie was delivering. Because if they'd listened, we would have taken different decisions. And we would have today been in a much better place than where we are.
Oh, by the way, before you move on to the God question, he's actually very empathic about the activities of what happened in Codesa and the influence of money and the Americans and their interest within those conversations. I love listening to that man.
And he is correct to say that.
Yeah.
And in fact, Sampie is also correct when he said that that process of influence of the Brits and the Americans happened even before Codesa. It happened when the ANC was still in exile. And then already they identified certain people inside the ANC that they had to target with money. They did so and they succeeded. And there was a well-prepared plan that ran up to the eventual unbanning of the ANC and the South African Communist Party and the eventual negotiations that happened. None of these things were just coincidences. They were not flashes in the pan. They were clear, well worked out long-term plans to bring us to the point where, yes, there will be universal franchise, but there will be no transformation of the economy, and that ultimately the economic power will continue to rest in the hands of the white monopoly capitalists. And Sampie could speak eloquently about that much better than anyone else, because he saw it from close quarters, how it was planned and what was done. So Shall we talk about God?
Yes, sir. 5 minutes and we are out of here.
I call myself a Christian. I think I'm a person of faith. But if you ask me, is God a man or a woman? I don't know. If you ask me about the color that is associated with God, I can only say to you that the color associated with God has been brought to this country by white colonists. So that's why we suddenly, when they came here, had a white Jesus with blonde hair and blue eyes, which probably historically was impossible, but was dished up even to the local indigenous people. And that saying, which is a trite saying, but a true saying, the colonists arrived with the Bible, and the people had the land, and when they eventually settled down, the people had the Bible and they had the land. It's true.
Yeah.
Faith, and specifically the Christian faith in this country, played a very, very negative role in undermining the culture, the consciousness, the dignity of the indigenous people of this country. And anyone who speaks about faith in South Africa must acknowledge that first and foremost. So if you talk about faith and you call yourself a Christian, and yes, I grew up in a Christian environment. You have to be very careful how you formulate it, and you must be very, very humble in the statements that you make. You must not be strident. And you must acknowledge the importance of people being able to return to their roots, the need for us to also find the indigenous culture of our people, and not to put that in a category as if it is lesser than the Christian faith. It's not. In fact, the reality must be that the people of this country and the people of Africa need to be discovering again their indigenous culture, faith, the understanding of their ancestors, all of that. And the way in which Christianity, in its Western format, in its Western cultural expression, has repressed that and have even brought some of us in this country to think lesser of that culture and to treat it as something inferior, must come to an end. So, yes, I call myself a Christian, but I do all of those things in a very careful way. And I think the older I get, I realize how little I know. The older I get, I realize how much more I must be less strident about my views on faith and culture. And I must listen more than speak.
Mr. Niehaus, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Boom.
Nkululeko on Cultr.